Okay. Like I said, we'll get started because why not? Right? Unless you insist on having those 3 extra minutes. We'll just finish 3 minutes earlier, I guess. All that means. I do feel so awkward just like standing here at the front with just 2 people. I might just sit there. Welcome to Planetary Literatures in English, I guess. My name is Patrick. This is the first time that I teach this particular class. Not the first time I teach at the university. I have taught here before, admittedly to a larger class. Technically, we are supposed to be 3 in this class. But I was sent a message this morning by the 3rd person, Marcio. He's having issues with his visa to actually come here, so that's like the only reason why he's not here today. So it will be a much more close-knit class, which will require some adaptation, I think, on my part, because I'm really not used to this type of thing, right?
That's true.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'll get to your names in a second, but I just want to preface that, right? That we might need to adapt some things a little bit. Usually I have things like PowerPoints and all of that, but I feel weird lecturing in front of 2 people for 3 hours, right? I just think it's not going to be super conducive to learning. But we'll see. Maybe it will be. I don't know. My instinct would be to say that lecturing in front of 2 people for 3 hours would be boring for me and you. So I just kind of want to avoid that whenever possible. So of course today, right, the main plan, I guess, is to go over some of the basic terms that we're going to be working with, some of the basic ideas, and just get some of the administrative stuff out of the way, just so we're all on the same page about how we're going to be moving forward. Right? Does that work for everyone? Okay, awesome. So first of all, my name is Patrick. What's your name?
I'm Liani.
You're Liani, okay. And
Alicia,
yes. Okay, I was going to say Emily because I remember the name, but no, the A, sorry. Yeah, so Alicia and Liani. Okay, tell me a bit about yourselves. Whoever wants to start can go, but what year are you in? What are your special interests in literature? That kind of stuff, if any.
Sure, I can go first. It's my 3rd year, and hopefully I'll graduate this year.
Mm-hmm.
I love literature just because I love reading in general. This class just interested me. I don't know because of the title, Planetary Imagination.
Yeah.
I was just like, oh, where is this going?
Yeah.
Because I think I didn't know knowing the title, what to expect. It's just interesting. I was like, I didn't know it was just going to be such a tiny class.
Yep.
So now it does not surprise me that much because I did take another class that was kind of like this last year.
Okay.
I don't remember the title of it, but we were also a really little class.
Mm-hmm.
By little, I meant more 10.
Okay, yeah.
Not 3.
So more normal. Yeah.
But just literature is just my way of disconnecting with the world. It makes me feel better, especially that the world is kind of sometimes too much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I just feel like I need a break. And to me, this is the best break I can have.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. Interesting choice of word, disconnect.
Yeah.
You usually people use
very much Wi-Fi, telephone, and everything. We're all just on the connected.
I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. Yeah. Do you have a particular book that you constantly return to? I hesitate to use favorite book because it's not necessarily accurate for literature students.
I have it in more than one language.
Yeah.
So Pride and Prejudice.
Pride and Prejudice, yeah.
I do read it often.
Yeah.
But that's just because it's a classic, and to me, it's why not?
It's hard to go wrong with Jane Austen.
Yeah. I think so too.
Yeah.
She's really funny.
No, sure, she's funny. It's shocking how, for someone who basically kickstarted the modern novel as we know it, it's still so contemporary, right? You would think that, there's a lot of older books that are just
they did not grow up as well.
No, exactly. And yet it just still is relevant, right? Hence why we constantly have like adaptations of Jane Austen, which might be unforgivable, but her books are still good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Alicia. Go ahead, Nan.
So I graduated last year from a teaching English and second language program in Sherbrooke.
Congratulations.
Yeah. So now I'm starting my master's this year. But because I was in education before, I did not have like a major in literature, so I'm missing 2 classes. For cycle.
Right.
So then move on to my master's. So I'm doing this at the same time as I'm starting my master's.
Okay.
What's your master in?
English studies.
Oh, that's why.
Yeah, that's it. I'm like switching from teaching to English.
What's your other course that are you taking another course?
I'm taking reading fiction. I had to take one of the.
Oh, yes, that is the introduction to.
No, that's it. So I have like 54 credits in literature, so I'm missing 6.
Right.
That's so that's it. Yeah.
Awesome. Who's teaching the reading fiction class this year?
I'm not sure.
Is it Heather? I thought
she sometimes she often teaches
we
it.
didn't get any messages yet from her, so I'm not sure who's teaching it.
It might be, yeah.
I saw on my schedule, but I can't remember.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It was just out of curiosity.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Pick the class.
Yeah, but it's kind of
It's very different depending on who teaches it. No, that's it. The books always change.
No, that's it. So,
and it's very hard.
You know that? Yeah.
Oh, no kidding. Yeah.
But I had to choose between like reading drama, reading poetry, and reading fiction.
Yeah, I'm taking reading poetry. I hadn't taken it my first year, and it was not here like last year.
Is it Jane is teaching that? Yeah, Jane. Yeah, she's the only one. Yeah, I mean, we're gonna do a bit of poetry, as you maybe saw in the syllabus this semester. But yeah, cool. Okay, awesome. So, I wanted to turn. Do you have access to the syllabus?
I'm trying.
Yeah. Okay. So it's on Studio. Instead of like projecting it necessarily behind us and just all stretching.
I was not connected, so I have to connect everything.
Yeah, but if it's an issue, I can project it, and we'll just call it there. I'm just bringing up my notes for today. So I guess a little bit on me, right? Because why not? So I'm a PhD student here at the Université de Montréal. I'm not formally a professor, right? The class itself is actually just the second time that it's ever given, I think, in the program. Right? The first time it was given, it's actually a class that was started by my supervisor, Professor Harding, who you might have her in like reading theory or modern literary theory. Yeah, okay, so she teaches that every once in a while. So she started this class very much as a way of thinking through her main research project, right? Which is, some of you might have seen on the 8th floor, the Centre de, what is it? CLCP, Centre de Recherche en Littérature et Culture Planétaire, right? I don't remember what the E is. Something else, right? I'm really selling it right here. So she basically has this research project that she runs with other professors in the department, and she decided to turn it into an undergraduate class, or second year undergraduate class. In 2023, I want to say, was the first time that it was taught, right? And so we're doing it again. So usually my teaching style, right, tends to be a mix of theory and, obviously literary analysis, but also discussion, right? I really want to avoid lecturing too much in front of you, even when there are more students in the classroom. I don't think it's super conducive. But one of the things that we're going to see with this particular class is that we also have the opportunity to be very creative, right? Not just with the types of literatures that we're going to be discussing, right, we're really going to cover a range of styles and forms, right, which I think is integral to the planetary discussion, right, which I keep using the word, but we'll talk about what that means a little bit later. But also, it's kind of a way to that the creative aspect is also in the projects that you're going to be doing, right? I'm very flexible with the way that you communicate ideas and how you're actually going to submit various evaluations, right? I evaluate you because I have to, right? But I can have fun at least with it while doing it. So I hope that the creative part is going to kind of reflect that, right? So yeah, that was just kind of my brief intro. I formally don't really study planetary literature in the broadest sense in my dissertation work, in my own research work. I touch upon it, but my main research interest is in Canadian literature and Indigenous literature, which
There was a class this semester.
there is one, which I'm not teaching for reasons. They just gave it to someone else. Yeah. I got this class. So how it works usually in the department is that they try to obviously give classes to the professors, right? They have like first pick. Then if PhD candidates like myself are available, they try to give some to them for experience and because we don't cost as much as a professor, right? That's the cynical reading of it. And then everything else, like if there's any classes left, they send out like a call for applications, right? And the Canadian literature one was one of those ones that was sent out a call for applications for, right? And I had already been given the planetary class, so it just kind of didn't work out that way. I was actually supposed to give the Canadian Lit class like 2 years ago, and because of administrative nonsense, they forgot that they had given it to me, and so I ended up not having it. Yeah, it's fun. Truly a great time to be alive sometimes. Okay, but yeah, I just wanted to kind of run over that real quick. Yeah, so I wanted to then, before we get into some of the more interesting stuff, I just wanted to go over some of the syllabus and technical elements of the class. The first thing that I like to mention, and this is especially true with how many we are, attendance is somewhat mandatory. Like, I can't formally evaluate you for being here or not, and I'm not actually going to take attendance because that would be an errand in futility. But especially for this class, I would like you to tell me if you cannot be here, right? Like, I get it. We all have responsibilities outside of school, right? Like, sometimes you're stuck in traffic, your dog died, I don't know, right? Like, there's all kinds of stuff that can happen. Just let me know as soon as you actually do know, because 2 people is fine, right? We can make that work. If 2 people cannot show up to class one week, having a one-on-one for 3 hours is probably not going to happen, right? Or if it does happen, it would probably be like in my office or anything like that, where like you just ask me any questions that you may have about a particular text, and we make it like a short conversation, right? So that's probably how that's going to operate. Okay. So I just wanted to kind of get that out of the way. More than any other class, just do keep me posted, right? And in fact, you can probably keep everyone posted, right? What we can probably do, I don't know if you have access to everyone else's emails from Studio. If you don't, I'll ask you to write down your emails or anything like that. Like that, we can just kind of like, everyone can be in touch, right, about this. Especially also for an 8:30 in the morning class. If people can know that they can sleep in on a Tuesday, it would be.
We can have the.
You have access to everyone?
Emails, yeah.
Okay, good. Another thing that I do like to mention is that I record classes. Okay, I do this pedagogically, right? It's not for any like I don't make a podcast out of it and like monetize it or anything like that. That's not the point. I do it pedagogically in case people, for example, like Marcio, are not there, where they can either listen to whatever they missed, right? Or even for you guys who are there, right? If we talked about something and you wanted to kind of run that idea over again, or were unsure, right? Your notes were not as clear as you maybe wanted them to, you can kind of go over the recordings over again, right? So it's not like the peak audio quality. I just use my computer mic for this, and usually right after the class, I just upload it to Studio, right? So it's there for you if you want it. I put all of those other resources. Usually, if I have a PowerPoint, right, I'll put that up. I put any other resources that I think are going to be useful up on Studio. Okay? And as you saw, I also send little communications to you through Studio, but I can also do so by email. Just usually that's how I communicate. Okay. Okay. So let me just look over my notes here. Yeah. So. Yeah, we'll go over the syllabus together just real quick, not every single part, but enough to give a better sense. And then we'll talk about class expectations and anything that might be of interest going forward. Okay. Yeah, so did you manage to get the internet and the syllabus? Okay, good. So all of that administrative stuff is pretty standard up at the top. My office is on the 8th floor. The location is something that might change. Just before class, I went over to Lynn's office in our department and asked her if it was possible to have more of a seminar room instead of taking up a space that other people might be able to use a little bit more productively. Right? I don't know if she's actually going to manage to get us to change classes. Okay. She mentioned that she was going to know by the end of today's class. Right. So she's taking care of it right now. So if it is something that does change, I'll let you know probably today. Okay. If I forget, you can feel totally free to actually like reach out to me and be like, "Hey, you forgot something. Please let us know." So yeah, that's how we're going to operate. But I have a feeling that we're going to be able to change classes, but I'm just leaving it open that it may or may not be the case. So I should maybe like highlight this in the syllabus, but we'll see. Yeah, from 8:30 to 11:30. Usually how I do is like the kind of what we call Pomodoro style, right? 50 minutes, 10 minutes, 50 minutes, 10 minutes. We'll see how the class goes, right? Sometimes we get like caught up in conversation about something in particular, and we just kind of keep going. In this case, we'll just kind of adjust, right? I am flexible on things like that as well, where, if we don't take as many breaks, we'll just finish earlier or something like that, right? But at the end of the day, we'll try to do as full of a 3 hours as possible, mostly because I respect your time and money, right? You paid for this class, right? And I think that's an important part, right? It's maybe a cynical way of looking at it, but I think it's important for you to get what you would consider your money's worth in this sense. So even though we are fewer, I do think it is important to do like the full time. Okay. I doubt it, but any questions so far about anything? Yeah. Okay. So I'm not going to read over the full overview, but I want to look at that first sentence that I wrote because I do think it captures a lot of what we're going to be doing. It does what most topic sentences should do, right? It gives you a sense of the argument. Right, this course investigates the theoretical, imaginative, and aesthetic possibilities of planetarity as a critical framework in literature, film, and visual art. Right? Have either of you taken like the 20th and 21st century literatures class? Mm-hmm. You have? No, you wouldn't have necessarily. But I'm sure you're somewhat aware, right? In literature, we have a myriad of critical frameworks, right, that we can take, and you would have seen that in 20th and 21st century, I assume, right? We can read a text through a feminist lens. We can read a text through a Marxist lens, through structuralism, so on and so forth, right? And this is what we're really pointing to when we say Planetary as a critical framework in literature, right? You were mentioning earlier that you're not sure what this is, and that is part of the class, right? Is that it is a term that is still very much in development, okay? Technically, planetary thought, if you want to call it like that, or critical thinking, really started being a thing, being a term that people used in academic settings in the 90s, right? So relatively recently. I don't know if you were alive in the 90s, but for me, it's relatively recently, at least in the grand scheme of things, right? And so it's really, at least as far as a term is concerned, right, a post-Cold War type of term. Okay? So that may seem like a long time, right? 35 years or so, right? It's a long time to develop a critical framework. Okay? But at the same time, when we consider what it entails, it makes sense that planetary is something that kind of resists a rigid definition, right? And the easiest way that I can kind of open up this idea of planetary thought is that you can consider it a mix of ecological thought, right? So literally the planet, right? Historical thought and political thought. Okay. And the different ways in which, and of course literary thought, but like that's a given, right? Cultural. And of course, like the ways that all of these three things are much more connected and much more ingrained into one another than we tend to always think of, right? And that's why I bring up at the very last sentence, right, the kind of four broad themes that we'll be working with, right? Fluid, right? As you may or may not know, right, the ecology that we're living in, right, is not fixed, right? Planet Earth has changed a lot over the billions of years that it exists, right? And it continues to change a lot, both for human reasons and just the fact of its existence, right? I wrote extraterrestrial. That's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek one. We're not necessarily going to talk about aliens per se. That's not the what I mean by that, but right, in the sense that it's more than the Earth, right? It's everything that goes beyond it in a metatextual sense, right? That's where the political and cultural comes in, right? It's not explicitly Earth-bound necessarily. It is its own thing, but it is inevitably tied to it. Deep time, right? So we're going to be discussing that. Deep time being, in short, the idea that time as we understand it, right, is but a blip, right? We tend to think of time in very human-centered terms, right? And which makes sense, right? On a certain level, we are human after all, right? We are some of the few species on Earth that have the ability for like rational thought in that like very basic sense. But at the same time, right, deep time kind of engages with the fact that there are billions of years of history beyond us, right? Both in the past and potentially in the future, right? And what does it mean to actually think through that in literary terms? Okay? So a lot of the books that we're going to be discussing, or short stories that we're going to be discussing, are address this question of deep time. And of course, the speculative, right? This is, of course, one that more explicitly addresses the future, right? What are the possibilities of the planet, right? Capital P, planet. Both as something where we as humans operate, and as some texts show, right? I don't remember, a little bit with Split Tooth, but as some texts show, maybe not necessarily with the human either, right? What does that entail to think through non-human futures? We're going to talk about this specific symbol a lot in class, and you'll see why. But the core example that I give, mostly to family members who desperately try to understand what I do as a literary scholar, is so the example of planetary that I give is oil, right? Like petrol in cars, right? It kind of touches upon a lot of these notions that we're going to be discussing, okay? And in fact, we're going to be discussing it explicitly in texts like How Beautiful We Were, okay? Which is at the end of the semester, but still, right? Just to give my voice a little bit of a rest and so I can drink water, why might oil be a prime example just based off of what we've said so far, right? Or what I've said. What do you think oil kind of captures out of all of these things? And it's okay if you don't have like a firm answer, right? It's just to launch the question to you.
I would say it's because one, it affects the ecosystem all the time.
Good. Yeah.
So of course it's going to change how the planet is or was and will be.
Yeah.
Like you said. So I think that's one of the huge part, and also it's how we interact with it.
Good.
So that's another thing I would say.
Yeah.
Because we use it a lot. And the more we use it, the more it changes things.
Good.
So I guess that's how I would see it.
Good. So in the present moment, right, if we want to think of it purely through that lens, has a huge ecological impact, absolutely, and social impact.
Yeah.
Great. Yanni, do you have anything you wanted to add?
Well, in terms of like deep time, there's like the time it takes to regenerate and stuff, which we consume it way too much for the time it would take to.
Definitely.
Right?
Yeah. The liter of oil that you have in your car, I don't know if you actually have cars, but like I'm sure you've used cars, but right, the liter of oil that you use in a car, right, in, I don't know, an hour or something like I genuinely don't know how long it takes, but let's be generous and say a day, right? It took millions of years to form, right? And involved actually non-human elements, right? It's often fossils that were crushed over millions of years, right? So you're burning dinosaurs basically is what you're doing. Yeah, well, it's fun to think about. Certainly, it's kind of like it's kind of a head trip when you think of it, right? And this is not me like encouraging drug use, but it is a bit of a head trip to think about planetary stuff, right? So yeah, kind of like the dinosaurs that were not only there for millions of years and millions of years ago, kind of burned up over millions of years and got crushed by, Earth forces, right? It's literally the planet kind of crushing it into mush that you then consume in your car, right? Good. So there's that one. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
The money.
Say more.
Capitalism.
Yay! Great.
It affects more the countries we take it from than the countries we use it.
Yeah, it's extremely political. Yeah, very, very political. Excellent. Yeah. So I just kind of gave you a brief run of what we're going to be talking about with the Imbodo Mbue text, but it's super political, right? We've started wars over that, and we'll continue to start wars over it as it becomes a scarcer and scarcer resource, right? Entire countries have been overturned, right? Entire governments have been overturned in order to give access to certain multinationals, right? Oil, right? You can take the easy example of like most Latin American countries, right? Very oil-rich countries, and a lot of them were, especially in the 70s and 80s, right, wanted to nationalize a lot of their oil, right? And at the time, America wasn't as much of a joke as it is today, but like the basic idea of it, right? Nevertheless, like they wanted to have control over that, right? And so a lot of the governments that you see in turmoil today are a direct response to the fact that they wanted to control resources like oil, right? Or mines or wood, right? Whatever. Okay? Which is problematic in its own right? That's not to say that just because the Latin American countries would have like owned their resources, it would have been necessarily better, right? It's still exploitation in a capitalistic sense, right? But it is but it is interesting to consider it from like a political level, right? Of like what people are willing to go through in order to gain access to this resource. Okay? So yeah, absolutely. I mean, these are all very, very good points. Okay. I didn't explicitly bring up capitalism in no, I didn't. I'm sorry. I'm just reading through it quickly, but I didn't explicitly bring up capitalism in the course overview, but it is an inevitable part of our discussions.
Because it's not the only one that exists also. So it would have been, a little centered to just say capitalism, because a lot of countries that do not use the system also exploit.
Yes, although what countries don't use this system? I'm genuinely curious. Like, if you had in mind, right, a country that didn't do it.
It's not as much as they don't use it, it's much that they suffer it. I'm thinking of many African countries that are just being used. So it's not that they use capitalism to exploit things, it's more that they're there and we came to them and we're using it to control it from them.
Absolutely. So you're pointing to a kind of form of neo-colonialism, right? Of what we tend to call that. And this is, again, a term that is, very complex in and of itself, and we're going to be addressing that through, especially at the beginning of class, right? That kind of transition from colonialism to neo-colonialism and what that entails. But yeah, absolutely, it is very important to consider that. And that's when, even though I didn't name it specifically, that's where a lot of critical thinkers like Spivak, Gayatri Spivak, who I mentioned in the overview, and Dipesh Chakrabarti, will use the term global, right? I'm sure you've heard of this term, right? Globalization or anything like that. That's usually what they refer to, right? Is the kind of making global of a single system, a single economic or political system, right? And despite the attempts or existence of nominally non-capitalist countries, right? You can think of Cuba, you can think of Venezuela, you can think of any other, right? A lot of African countries. Was it recently Mali who tried to kick out the French?
Surprising.
Or a lot of West African countries are going through like a lot of like turmoil in that sense. And have done so for generations at this point. And despite this, right, as you were pointing to, Alicia, there is an inevitability, right, to the way that we operate. It's very hard to dissociate ourselves from it, right? The only way that some people, especially here in the heartland of capitalism, right, that people see of escaping it is by basically isolating yourself in a forest with your little tent, right? And just kind of like completely dissociating yourself from it. But even then, it would be very hard because you're still impacted by everything that's happening in the world, right? You'd be at the mercy of like climate change and so on and so forth. And so, right, that's what we refer to when we're talking about globalization, right? It's the making of the world as an interconnected and global space, right? Specifically for the purposes of human and capitalistic consumption, right? And so at the end of the day, right, if you want to think of Planetary as something that does try to rethink the global, right, that's in the quote-unquote global that I put in, that can be another productive way of starting to think through that, right? Some people often use interchangeably the term planet and globe, right? But from a critical perspective, it's not something that like a lot of planetary thinkers will engage with, right? Global for them is a very anthropocentric, it's a key word that you might want to keep in mind, right? Human-centered notion, right? The Earth exists for us, right? Us humans. And conversely, the planet, to again pull from Spivak and the text that you're going to be reading on week 3, the planet exists for planetary thinkers as its own agent, right? It's fully embracing the non-human, right? In all of those possibilities that you were pointing to with the oil example. Now, this might have confused you more, or not, I don't know. But again, this is something that is going to take us through many, many weeks of contemplation, right? Through, of course, literature. But you can start to see also why it is a post-Cold War thing, right? What existed during the Cold War that doesn't exist anymore? This is really going to show your historical knowledge.
Yeah.
There's an entity that existed in the broadest sense that no longer exists in the Cold War. It's like the defining factor of the Cold War.
I was going to say the Berlin Wall, but I don't know. Okay.
So the Berlin Wall came down in 1989.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the Berlin Wall associated with, right, as an idea?
Well, the separation of two huge parties in Germany.
Yeah, so Germany, good.
Wasn't it the communism, capitalism?
Bingo. Okay. What? So the West. So there was East and West Germany, right? East Germany was the communist side. Okay. What else? Was Germany the only one that existed as a communist country? East Germany?
Russia.
Okay, good. The Soviet Union.
Of course.
Okay. Yeah, we say of course, but we need to remember this, right?
Yeah, it was with Ukraine at the time.
Yeah, so it had basically most of Eastern Europe was what we call was like one country that we called the Soviet Union.
Separated.
Today, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So despite like the issue that is what we were talking about, it's like the Soviet Union, the Eastern Bloc, so to speak, right? But despite what we can rightfully consider some of the faults of like former socialist countries, right? The most obvious one are like the Stasi or whatever, right? The lack of any kind of democratic or most democratic institutions, for example. What it represented, right, philosophically, is something very interesting that we have lost in this globalized world, right? And that is to say, the considering of different possibilities, right? Before 1991, when the Soviet Union kind of formally collapsed, right, despite a lot of the acknowledged problems that the Eastern Bloc had, right, what it represented or what it could represent in people's minds is that something else was possible, right? More often than not, right, countries like Cuba came to represent that over the Soviet Union, but like nevertheless, right, in people's imagination, right, you could still say, well, there's something else aside from capitalism, right, that is technically possible and that some countries are working towards, right? And that's why a lot of planetary thinking is specifically a post-Cold War thing, insofar as we no longer have that, right? Like, yes, technically, Cuba is still a socialist country, right? Nominally, so is North Korea or whatever, right? But at the end of the day, they're also so small, right? And so ingrained into the global system that it is difficult to imagine anything outside of those possibilities, right? Or even the term possibility. And that's very much what planetary thought achieves, right? Or tries to achieve. Right? At the end of the day, it is a theory, right? Or a set of theories. And so, we have to kind of take it as such, right? That is something that we're going to work towards, right? Or think about, but that inevitably will not necessarily take place in the same way in practice, right? Like anything. Right? Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Sometimes I feel like I ramble in class and just kind of like go off on like random tangents, which is part of the reason why I record lectures, because I've had students be like, I lost you like 10 minutes ago, right? You went on some tangent and started talking about something, but it doesn't matter. As long as we're all on the same page, I think that's fine. So yeah, no questions about any of that. Right? Basically, this class is a thought process. Okay. Before, just to better plan for the rest of today, did both of you have a chance to look at the link I sent for week 1, the environmental racism?
I didn't.
In Death Alley? No, okay. It's fine. we'll talk about it a little bit later. And I used it again more as an example than anything else, right? It's I already had it open. Okay, good. So if no one has any questions, the reading list. Did you go and buy the books yet?
I have one of them.
You have one of them. Okay, which one?
How Beautiful We Were.
Okay, good. Have you read it already, or you just had it?
Yeah, no, I read it in the class.
Okay, good. Which class?
The one I told you, I think it's globalization.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. Nice. With Heike?
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. Okay. She's the one who recommended the book to me, actually. So,
Perfect. She pictures it.
So yeah. There are quite a few books, right, for this class. It is quite hefty. I'm aware of this. There's one that I actually forgot to include. It's later in the class schedule, which is Swamp Thing, right? Swamp Thing Volume 1, which we're going to read on November 11th. Sorry, week 9. The reason you might have noticed on the bookstore website that I put these as strongly recommended rather than obligatory, okay? I'm well aware that you are operating on student budgets, okay? And there are a lot of texts that we're going to be reading here. So I want to take a brief tangent here, make a brief tangent and mention this. I don't care if you have a physical copy of the book or not, okay? Hell, I have had conversations with professors in my field, some of your professors this semester, actually, where I should say they, just to keep anonymity, have openly admitted that part of the school experience or the university experience is to be able to bullshit your way out of a class despite having read all of it, right? Which I kind of embrace, right? I understand that there are some classes that you're not going to be able to read the entire thing, right? Again, life gets in the way. Sometimes you have a lot of other stuff to read, depending on the classes that you're taking. So I get it. What I do ask is that at the very least you have read enough to have a discussion about it in class, okay? And to approach some of the major themes that we're going to be thinking through in this class. Okay. I think I split up the texts in a way that will give you enough time to actually read them properly. Okay. We'll go over through some of them later, right? I kind of I think did a solid mix of poetry to short stories to novels to novellas, right? In a way that kind of parses it out. And some of the texts, despite them being there, are pretty quick reads, right? Rita Wong's Forage is a thin book of poetry, right? So you can probably smash it out in a couple of hours, right? Split Tooth is a bit longer, but it's also a mix of kind of transcribed orature and poetry, so that one reads pretty quickly. But the texts that are longer, like the Tiger Flu or How Beautiful We Were, especially the Tiger Flu, I feel like it's a bit of a longer text to read. The way that it's written is just doesn't encourage necessarily fast reading. But I do give you more time for those texts. Okay. So it should be okay. If for whatever reason it doesn't work out that way, we'll just kind of adapt the class schedule accordingly, and we'll either take more time on one particular class or we'll drop a short story or something like that. Right? We'll adapt to your needs. Okay? Because I've read all of these, so it's not for me that I'm doing this. Yeah. So before we get too far, I did want to talk a little bit about the assignments. Okay. So the first one, right, in class presentation. Obviously, not each class will feature a 15 to 20-minute presentation. Okay, so I wrote this when keeping in mind that there was going to be at least 15 students in the classroom, which, of course, that didn't pan out. That just gives you guys more flexibility, okay? And as we said here, right, so these are presentations that you're going to give, which will provide, I say context, but context or kind of additions to classes that text that we're going to read in a particular class. Okay, so I gave a few examples here. Right, this context can be on the themes of literature. So if we talk about forage, for example, and you're presenting on that day, you can talk about resource extractivism in Canada, right? Because it's explicitly related to that. Okay? Or if we talk about how beautiful we were, you can make parallels to the way that oil extraction in Africa is reflected in Latin America, right? And how there are similarities and differences, right? Right, or this can be a presentation on the author or related texts, right? Anything you kind of want to kind of bring up in class that you think will add to the discussion. Does that make sense? Yeah, you look like you have a question.
Yeah, just to be sure.
Yes.
Depending on the class, we will add things to what we see in class that day. So if we're only 3, we can choose the class because we'll choose what we add to the class. That's
what do you mean? Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the question.
For example, we're reading How Beautiful We Were, and I decide to add something to that discussion.
Yeah.
So I would choose the class.
Yeah.
That we're doing on that book.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Right. I do ask that you kind of tell me in advance, right? Yeah, like think about it, of course.
Usually it's not something we're already talking.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So probably if you already know what you want to present on, that's fine. Or like which class you want to present on, that's great. You can tell me, I'll write it down. But it's also just probably like by the end of week 2, I would hope that you have by the end of beginning of week 3 that you would have some idea of which week you would like to present. Okay. And again, I say 15 to 20 minutes here. This is a really rough estimate. Okay. I expect that you'll have enough to say for that long, but if it's 13 minutes and 30 seconds instead, I'm not going to die. Right. I am really someone who prioritizes content over any kind of rigid structure. Right. Does what you say in your presentation actually add? Is it relevant? Does it get us to think about new avenues and paths? And of course, does it fit in with the general theme of the class? Yeah. Right. All of these are what I'm really going to be focusing on. Okay. Think of these as a kind of opening statement. Right? Does that answer your question properly? Does that make more sense?
Yeah, anyway, I'll probably have more questions.
That's fine.
Once I know.
That's fine. Yeah, totally. Critical readings. These are you can almost think of these as reviews, right? Or as textual reviews. I'm not gonna require you to give it in on specific dates. This is a bit of an open assignment. Okay, 3 times during the semester, I just want you to hand in a reflection on the text of that week. Okay, so if you have something that you wanted to say about Heart of Darkness, okay, which I'm sure you will all have a lot to say about, right, for a variety of reasons, both good and bad. I expect you to give in a critical reading on that week. Okay. Yeah, so when I say critical reading, it's like a page and a half max, right? Like review length. Okay. I'm not expecting a huge essay for this. Okay. This is something you can do from home. Send it to me by the time of the class that we're discussing. That's it. Okay. I've done this in previous classes. Again, even if you're not presenting on that day, it's just a way to kind of get you to put some of your basic thoughts about the text on paper, which I think is always helpful for anyone. Okay, participation is 10%. I'm really not worried about this part for this class because if it's just me talking for 3 hours, we're all going to want to die. Okay. I do want to spend a little bit of time on the final paper, so does anyone have any questions before we get to that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For the critical readings, if ever like I were to send my first one and it's not up to like what you expect or your standards, like is it okay that you let me know? And
good. Okay, that's
it's just I
because
did study in literature.
Yeah, that's totally fine. I'm just trying to think of a way to articulate this as best as I can. We're in a very privileged position in many ways, right? Where I can spend a lot of time on each of you.
Oh, if that's where you were going.
Yes. Where did you think I was going?
No, I was just like, okay. And I was like, where is this going?
No, we're weird. But so yeah, we're in a privileged position insofar as like I can spend a lot of time on each of your assignments. So both for the critical readings or even the presentations, if you want to run an idea by me first, right? Yeah, I'm happy to kind of like have a discussion about it either before or after class, or it'll be a bit harder for me to meet outside of Tuesday just because I also teach at CJEP during the week. So, but there are times when I'm available to meet like outside of class. Just give me a bit of a heads up, or even like you were saying, Leonie, for the critical readings. If you send me something, I'm like, it's good, but it can be better, right? I'm open for you to like try out a little bit better, or like adding on to anything. That's totally fine. Yeah. Think of me as like your 15-week editor or something like that. Yeah, we'll kind of like work through that. Obviously, at some point, I will have to kind of like give a cutoff, right? Like I do need to evaluate some things, but generally speaking, I am flexible to like have a back and forth with it. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I don't know if that's good pedagogically, but
I think it's good.
I'd say it is.
Yeah.
Because that's how we learn.
That's what I think.
Yeah.
But
when you have good feedback on an assignment and you are allowed to better it,
the
best.
Especially in this class we're not allowed, so it's good.
Yeah.
Takes us like a little off that we can teach and actually just be like, okay, is this actually good?
Yeah. It's I like teaching at a CJEP level, but man, having 30 students, I'm not able. 30 students per class, so 150 students, I'm not able to do things like this. So I'm taking the opportunity to like try it.
It's just literature, isn't it? Like
no, it's often like ESL or grammar, or some depending on like what level you're giving.
Yeah.
So yeah. So it's a mix of everything.
Must be more generic.
Oh yeah. That's why I'm able to do it at the same time, right? I can go give a college class with very little preparation.
And at least I'll have less correction for us. At least.
Yeah, for you, yes. Okay. Any other questions about?
No.
Okay. So, So the final paper, you have two options. This is where we can get really creative. Although like I said, the creative aspect can be seen in the other evaluations as well, depending on how you want to communicate this. But full-on creative is in the final paper. So you either have the option to do an essay, right, like a formal lit essay where you just analyze a particular element of one of the texts that we've talked about. Okay, you can talk about something that we haven't discussed in class, right? If you've read anything else in any of your other classes that you think would fit well with our framework, that's fine. Just run it by me first. Okay, that's all I ask. As I mentioned here in bold, right? If you so desire, there is technically a creative version of this assignment that can be submitted. I will put a version of this up on Studium, but do I have it here? University. Here we go. Creative rewriting. The basic premise that I was thinking of for this creative component is what I call a creative rewrite, right? Which is exactly as you might think of it. Okay, I have an ongoing document, right, where I'm kind of thinking through what that means. But it's basically taking one of the texts that we've discussed in class, right, and rewriting part of it, right, or adding to it, or thinking of a new creative outlet for it. Okay, so if you take something like Forage, right? Read Along's Forage, which is poetry, okay? you're like, you know what would really add on to this is a visual component, right? And you want to create a visual, I guess, appendix to Rita Wong, right? Great. That can be part of your creative rewrite. Okay. And basically, you creatively insert yourself into another work of art. Okay. I actually took this from a professor that I met at who's from UBC, right, Laura Moss, and she even had students who made like cupcakes and food and shit. So I always welcome food. That's fine, but it's just say like the creative possibilities are endless, right? However, don't do this assignment thinking that you can just make a like quick AI image or whatever and pass it on. There is a little. I guess I have it here. Yeah. There is a little element to it that will be more analysis driven, right? It's just shorter than if you do a full essay. Okay? So where a full essay, 6 to 8 pages, like 2,500 words or so, more or less. The creative rewrite, if you rewrite something, actually, I expect it to be about 1,000 words of rewrite and about 1,000 words that explains your logic and justification and so on for the rewrite, right? What you're actually going for artistically, right? Or if it's an image, right? Yeah, same thing, right? It's more or less 1,000 words of actual like explanation and non-fiction, right? Or analysis, and the creative stuff on top of it. Okay. This is actually the first semester that I'm trying it out. Okay. This is something, like I said, that was recommended to me by another professor, and apparently it worked very well in her class. If you're willing to try it out, great. If you're not up for it, or you just don't feel like it, you just go for the regular essay, totally fine. I'm not going to hold you against it. I'm putting it out there as something that is possible. Okay. I'm totally fine if you want to like flex your creative muscles here. Okay. Actually, because we're going to be talking about comic books a little bit later with Swamp Thing, if you want to do a comic book or something like that, that would require quite a bit of effort. But like a comic book page, right? That's totally fine, right? And again, any kind of creative outlet is possible. If you're a musician, go for it, type of stuff, right? Does that make sense for everyone? Yeah, that's why I wanted to spend a little bit more time on this, because it's just something new. Basically, you're my testing ground for for different classes. Yeah.
Well, it's good to know, but I'll probably forget for a little while.
I'll remind you. Yeah.
Because I always like to know what to expect from the semester, but the first week is a lot, so I just I skip ahead for a while because otherwise it gets too much.
For sure. Yeah. I'm just looking here, so I think that makes sense. Okay, yeah, good. So yeah, I'll put some version of this up on Studium when I think it's properly ready and like clear, because as you see now, it's basically just a wall of text. But that's where I'm heading for the final. Awesome. Yeah, obviously plagiarism. Just don't. You have no reason to. I'm so flexible that it would be like just oddly specific to plagiarize and to use AI for this class, but whatever. Okay. The last thing I want to mention before we kind of think through some of the precedents for this class is the class expectations, right? So obviously the major expectation is that you've read, like I said, enough of everything, right? And I was thinking about this last week because of the nature of the class, right, as something very fluid and inherently kind of jarring, I guess, right, as a critical frame. It is also perhaps a worthwhile thing to consider with each new text is how it connects to other texts, okay, or other aspects of the world around us. Okay, so like I said, the planetary framework is one that inevitably includes like a bunch of stuff, right? And you can push this further, right? And this is something I'll be doing in class a lot, but I encourage you to do so as well, right? Maybe some teachers have told you this before, but I think it always bears repeating. A lot of literature is self-referential, right? And I feel like, you looked confused on that, and so I'll elaborate on it in a second. And what I mean is that a lot of literature kind of pulls from other literature before it, right? Or even anticipates literature to come, right? As one of the professors I audited once said, art is from the future, right? Because it always expresses something that we are not yet conscious of needing, right? In many ways. And so I also encourage you in this class to kind of make those connections, right? Kind of half-assed as they may seem sometimes. And I think that that's one of the most simple in many ways, but also some of the most productive ways of thinking about literature, right? Just to take the example of Heart of Darkness, I was rereading it, of course, in preparation for this class, and what came to my mind was two things, right? Two completely separate things, right? That probably weren't even thinking of Heart of Darkness, but can create interesting connections, and that is the W.H. Auden poem, The Fall of Rome, right, which starts off with like a meditation on a crumbling train station, right? And it kind of got me on like this whole thought process of trains as this bringer of the colonial power into the heart of darkness, right? Often, and like obviously, I don't think Auden was thinking of this because that's not at all what he was like thinking about in that poem. But that's kind of like where my mind went, right? But also, and perhaps more accurately, I was thinking of the J.G. Ballard novel, The Crystal World. I see by the blank looks on your face that you have no idea what I'm talking about, and that's totally okay, right? J.G. Ballard was like a very famous science fiction writer from the 50s and 60s, and The Crystal World is literally about a physicist who goes into the jungle in order to figure out why it's being crystallized, right? And so the connection in my mind was like this whole idea of science trying to frame and literally put into stone, right? And categorize things in firm ways, right? And especially, of course, with the jungle connection, it makes sense with Heart of Darkness. I'm referencing Heart of Darkness as if you've already read it. Have you? No. Either? Do you know even what it is about? Okay, well, I'm making connections that you have no idea what I'm referring to. It's literally about a guy who walks into the Belgian Congo in order to find someone, right? And it becomes a whole criticism of imperialism broadly, but also is oddly unself-critical about British imperialism. If you've seen Apocalypse Now, the movie, no?
I know what it is, but
okay, well, it's an adaptation, but they displace it to the Vietnam War instead of the Congo. But anyway, like, I'm giving an example that I just realized have like no actual that has no actual bearing on you. But that's the kind of like connections I invite you to make, right? And I gave literary examples, but it can be anything, right? I saw this movie that really was quite incredible. It made me think of this part of it, right? You'd be surprised by how many academic articles kind of start like that, right? And it's something that I really encourage you to do, and that I think is going to add to the depth of the conversations that we're going to be having, right? And that, of course, thematically fits in with the whole like notion of planetary thought. Okay? Does that make sense? Yeah?
Yeah.
Cool. I realize that it's been about an hour that I've been talking. Did we want to take a break or just kind of like power through and finish earlier?
I'm good. I'm good too.
You're good? All right, awesome. Yeah, I also toyed with the idea, but I don't want to... this is purely if you want to, just as a way of adding to the experience of thinking about the world around you in a political manner, right? I was thinking of, actually encouraging you, and encouraging is probably the best term here because I don't want to force you to do it. Actually going outside, which for literary scholars is like the great fear. But actually going outside and engaging with the ideas that we're discussing in class, right? Actually putting the theory into practice, right? So, for example, just the easy example that I can think of, right? On week 4, right, September 23rd, we're talking about split tooth. And then the week after, we don't have class, but it's because of National Truth and Reconciliation Day, right? Which we'll of course talk about. But that week, you can be absolutely certain that there's going to be a lot of events in Montreal concerning Indigenous rights, Indigenous history, right? Whether it's protests or movie screenings or even just like book sales or things like that, right? There's all kinds of events all the time happening in Montreal. And I say I don't want to force you because, again, I'm well aware that you have way more things to do in life than this. It's just an idea that came to mind that can maybe help you to kind of, push this a little bit further or in a different direction than you might necessarily think about. Okay, because all of this is worth nothing if you can't actually engage with the people around you about it. But yeah, I'm not going to give you extra credit or anything like that. Although if you, I say that, but if you do want to kind of incorporate such experiences into your critical readings or into class, that's totally fine as well. Yeah. If any of you do want to know how to find what's happening as far as events in Montreal go, I have plenty of websites that give these events or this protest or this thing is happening in Montreal, right? So there's plenty of ways to actually figure it out. I think that pretty much covers that. Yeah. I'm just looking through it just real quick to make sure. Yeah. Okay. So you said that you kind of looked through the environmental racism in Death Alley. Okay. The reason why I wanted to bring this up, and we'll kind of end on this, this will be the last major thing that we'll talk about. I think it is, along with oil, a really good example of a lot of the stuff that we're going to be talking about in class. Okay. Do you have the link open? Did you get it open? Or
the link of
the environmental racism in Death Alley, Louisiana?
It's right here.
Okay, good.
Now,
yeah. Okay. Leonie, since you read it, I'm curious, what were some of your initial thoughts on this? Is this something that you were aware of? Is this something that you kind of had a sense of but didn't know how to put it into words? Did you hate it, love it? What are some of your thoughts on this project?
Well, after, because I watched the little movie talk.
Yeah.
So they start by asking if toxic air is a monument to slavery, how do we take it down?
Mm-hmm.
And without any introduction, I was okay, this is a big question.
Yeah.
What exactly do they want to address? Is that what does it mean?
Yeah.
But then it was super well explained. And it wasn't something I was really aware of. I feel we all have a sense that some certain regions of the world are polluted by rich industries that just control those poor. Often it's not the white population that is affected.
Mm-hmm.
So that was super interesting. I found interesting when they talk about the concept of invisibility and how politicians use this to deny what's happening or to just take advantage of. I'm sometimes looking for my word.
That's fine. Take your time.
English is not my first language. So like
you can say it in French. I think we all understand French. Yeah, at-risk populations.
Yeah. There you go. So that was interesting.
Yeah, definitely. When they only mention the term once, but it kind of touches upon what you were bringing up is the idea of sacrifice, right? Which is something that you hear a lot in contemporary worlds, right? What are we willing to sacrifice, right? To put it to take a title from an entirely different book, an entirely different context by Claire Colebrook, who's a great theorist, if any of you want to check him out. But who would you kill to save the world, right? Right. And here we kind of see this perversion of it in a really interesting way. So, Alicia, just to kind of like give you the long and short of it, basically what the project uncovers is how a lot of former plantations in Louisiana, right, which were obviously like hubs of slave ownership, right, are today what we would kind of call sacrifice zones, right, and what Danny was saying, areas where toxic air and toxic soil is just kind of left unchecked, right? And of course, the people who are most affected by this are the local population, which is still often racialized, right? So black or poor populations, right? And so what the project kind of goes through is literally mapping, in many ways, how those former plantations are literally underneath those sacrifice zones, right? And when I use the term sacrifice zones, it's a term that actually started in the Cold War, by the way, as a place where we don't care if we destroy it, right? Yeah. And it was specifically coined as testing ground for places where we tested nuclear weapons.
Yeah,
right?
Near Cuba.
Right, so islands, right? Absolutely. There's a lot of islands in the Pacific that were just straight up in the ocean, right? Mm-hmm. Because who cares about fish, right? But also, right, former indigenous lands, right, in the desert. If any of you did any of you see Oppenheimer?
No, it's on my...
Yeah, it's on your watch list.
To watch this.
Yeah. It's a fine movie and all, but there's
it looks really long.
It's so long. It's insufferably long. I'm not gonna lie. Like, it's got a few cool moments, but is it worth like 3 hours of your time? I don't know, but that's up to you to decide. The only reason I bring it up is because there's a scene where Oppenheimer. I'm just going to call him Cillian Murphy because it's cooler. But they're staking out where they're going to test the bomb for the first time, and it's in the middle of the Colorado desert. And basically, what you gather from the conversation is that they just displaced the local indigenous populations that had their reservations there, right? Without a second thought.
Yeah.
Right. And so that place is a good example of like a sacrifice zone, right? Where it's land that people lived on, mm-hmm. or sometimes still live on, and we deemed worthy of sacrifice for quote unquote progress. In this case, the creation of a bomb that could basically set off a sun over, specific populations. Right. And so that's kind of what, when we're talking about making connections, right, that's what I was kind of thinking of when I was reading this text, right, and they refer to sacrifice, right, specifically, this is like halfway through the text, and they're the heading, reading the earth, which is a term that you can kind of think of for this class. As plantations reorganized life, they also managed death, The spatial logics of the plantation also dictated the siting of black cemeteries. Slave masters would not sacrifice valuable land for black cemeteries. Enslaved peoples were thus interred in uncultivated lands at the back of the plantation, at the ever-retreating edge of the cypress forest. And so just in this little paragraph, you get a really concise way of how land, especially in the colonial mindset that they're talking about here, in the slave owner mindset, not to use the pre-capitalist, I guess, or proto-capitalist mindset of land purely as a resource for management.
Yeah.
Right? And that it operates purely in a way that benefits, right, I say this in huge air quotes, it operates purely in the benefit of, in this case, the plantation, right? The slave owner, and so on, right? Which then became the factory owner, which then became Silicon Valley, the Silicon Valley person who's putting 1 million servers up in the Great White North to allow you to look up just some random factoid on TikTok or whatever, right? This is getting really depressing real fast. But it's kind of a necessary. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah,
but it is.
It is what it is, and it's very much a necessary preamble to why planetary thinking is so important. Right? I'm not actually going to use this. I just realized. Yeah, exactly. For 2 hours at this point, it's completely useless. Okay. Right. So it's something that we can't escape of thinking about, right? If we want to actually think of a way to move out of it, you do not need to lift your hand up for.
What I found really shocking is now that we are aware of all the data that has been gathered, and there kind of is no way to deny it anymore, in my opinion. But you see how I think it's the government who established a plan for 2031 or something like that, where they identified different zones along the Mississippi River, and some of the zones are structured as industrial land, but then some are residential still, and some which are still residential are called now residential, but future industrial. So they're actually planning to erasing more of the population, or to move them again. It's they're still perpetrating those things that are in reasons to racialized populations, and they're they know the impacts it has, and they're just focused on that mindset of capitalistic idea of managing the resources and stuff. No matter what the consequences are on other people.
Yeah,
knowing.
It's not surprising.
No, that's it. Still, I was the entitlement.
Yeah. Oh, that's really good. I like that. The entitlement.
But in industrial, they're going to be industrial. To me, it's just those people necessarily should not be living there anyway, because I just watched a little bit, and it's literally toxic. So
that's it. It was called. It's now Death Alley, but it was called Cancer Alley. It's
great, much better.
Doing one or the other from the beginning, because switching between the two, it's just not helping anyway. So to me, it's just we're going to keep some of them residential, but the other are going to be industrial. But then the industrial are just still killing.
But also, it's
people there. So it's
whose decision is it to make to decide that part of the land will now, where people live, where people have been living for families and generations and stuff. It's I am entitled. I am the one to decide.
Yeah. No, but it's true, and I like that question of whose decision is it?
Yeah, because the land is not yours because you did not.
But it's still but it's still very how it's delimited in very straight and precise lines. like nature isn't like meant to be like calculated and straight, and it's like more organic usually. So it's like we divide it and then we conquer it, and it's still in that mind.
Just like you see, when you come from a plane and you look, and you see like
the squares, the angles, the straight lines.
The one
are really just planned out.
The one I really like is that image. I'm just going to show you the thumbnail of it because it kind of represents what you're saying, right? The river itself is just kind of wiggly and going in whatever direction it pleases, right? Because it's been there for millions of years and has kind of like created its own pathway, and then all around it is just highly strict and rigid.
They talk about like tracing the lines with like this perpendicular line from the river. That's how they like split up the land.
That's kind of ironic,
but it's very like it's like the settlers mentality.
Let's plan every square inch of this land.
It's
a little thing.
I know we're in Montreal now, of course, but have either of you ever lived or been to the suburbs, right? Like Brossard and Laval and things like that.
Really?
Chambly?
Country, more north, and it's like
you can say it. I have family in that area.
Okay, Saint-Jérôme.
Oh yeah. Okay. I literally have a cousin who lives there. Yeah.
It's like closer. It's farther than Laval.
Yeah.
And when you get to Laval, it's even further than that. You just go further.
Yeah.
You find the middle of nowhere, and then you turn left, and that's where Saint-Jérôme is.
I'm from a very small town.
Yeah. Where are you from?
Warwick.
Oh yeah, Warwick. Yeah, I know exactly where that is. Yeah, my mom's family.
Less than 5,000 people live there.
Yeah. My mom's family lives in St. Armand.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm sure it's not that far, but yeah.
It's like near it. It's like
But actually, so all of these are really good examples, right? Where obviously we're taking the example of Louisiana here because it has these long roots of slave plantations, right? So it creates this very apt parallel with history, right? And we can talk about slavery a lot and its ecological impact in and of itself, right? I guess we'll be talking about that with both Heart of Darkness and How Beautiful We Were. But anyway, like we can go on about that. But the Louisiana is a really salient example because of the plantations, but we see this here as well, right? Like, not only, of course, did North America all around it have slavery, right? We imported slaves in Canada as well. But, of course, the indigenous populations that were displaced, and the idea that was imported from the British farm style of creating these rigid ways is still seen today, right? The way that where my parents lived in Chambly, right, is set up is exactly like that image that I showed you, right? It's literally a basin and a river next to it with these squares of land, right, that people can live on or buy or whatever, right? It's super regimented, and if we want to tie it into like the environmental aspect, those are the worst places. Right? Because it's mostly concrete, which is awful for the environment. It's just heat. It's heat absorbing, and it's just grass as well. So awful for water retention, right? Grass is awful.
Just imagining my parents' house, but us, we still have like a forest behind us, and there's like a little. Not really a river. It's tinier than that.
It's a stream.
little stream.
Yeah.
That they couldn't destroy.
But
there was wildlife.
Yeah. But that's slowly changing.
Yeah.
But for a long time, right, Saint-Jérôme is the fastest growing area in Quebec, right? As far as like population and regardless, like that area is like in great development over the last few years, right? So like how long those forests are going to last?
Yeah, they were way much bigger 2 years ago.
I'm sure. Yeah. And so this imposition onto like wildlife or former populations, right, can be seen here as well, right, in really interesting ways. interestingly depressing ways, but still interesting nonetheless. And that, again, like, I'm not saying this as a way of like kickstarting yet another like downward spiral of depression where we're just going to end up the rest of the afternoon doom scrolling. Like, that's, I'm saying this because I want to highlight just how pervasive a lot of these things are, right? We're using one example of Louisiana, but this is something that pretty much most of the world can be seen, right? Even if you want to take it from the perspective of formerly colonized nations, right? A lot of them, just to take the slave example, right? A lot of places in Africa also follow these grids because they took them from, or they took that pattern from the European colonizers, right? And you still see those remnants today, except applied in a desert setting, right? Which makes it even more difficult often to actually do that properly, right? And yeah, I just wanted to kind of use this as a baseline for considering, right, a lot of the ideas that we're going to be talking about, right? A lot of the environmental issues that we're going to be discussing, or political issues that we're going to be discussing, have their roots in the slave trade, right? As evidenced by this project. Okay? But we can even, if you want to take a more literary perspective on it, I have a few examples that I brought up. This question of how we engage with the planet, right, or what we now call the planet, is one that has been around for centuries, right, if not millennia. Okay. And I actually had an example pulled up, and I think I accidentally closed it. Right, we can think of the plays of, I think I have it here. Yeah, the plays of Sophocles, right? Have any of you ever read Sophocles? Right?
I think it's
yeah.
Or philosophy classes.
Yeah, like Oedipus.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, exactly. Oedipus is a good one. Antigone is another one. Yeah.
I didn't read it, but I read some other work that.
Like the Jean Nouillet. Yeah.
We're really into the whole thing.
Yeah, like there's a lot that I use Sophocles as an example because I'm just trying to pull up here the example that I had before, if I can find it. Yeah, it's in the Climate Machines. Sorry. But yeah, just for example, the invocations that he makes in those plays of the gods, right? Especially, you see this especially in Antigone, but there's this whole undercurrent in a lot of those plays of the gods as representations of planetary forces, right? They're not just literal people, right, living on Mount Olympus. They are the wind acting upon you and having a literal impact on the way that people operate and that societies are formed, right? They are the rain. They are, forces beyond our comprehension, actually operating all together in mysterious ways, if you want to use that term, in order to actually affect everything around us. And I'm trying to look. You can keep talking if you wanted, but I just wanted to look for the example that I was looking for. Yeah. Here we go. Okay, so this was in Oedipus. Sorry, not in Antigone, but close enough. Right, there was this great passage. I'm just going to read it out from the chorus. Right, louder, louder, hear it crashing down. Divine report, dumb striking sound, picking up my hair with panic and shattering my soul there again. Light rips the sky. I'm stricken to the core with fear. Such a pregnant rush of light. Never comes without meaning. Never not with monstrous issue. Great, awful sky. Zeus, oh save us. Right? And so this is thousands of years ago, right? obviously with like a modern translation, because that's just not how the Greeks spoke, shockingly. But right, this idea of this overwhelming force of the planet, right? What philosopher Nigel Clark calls asymmetrical, right, relations that we have with the planet is already something that like is in the back of people's minds, right? And I don't think it's fair to say that the Greeks would have necessarily put it in those terms, right? I actually don't know enough about ancient Greek civilizations to actually say that with any kind of confidence. But from a literary perspective, you do definitely see the beginnings of this kind of thought, right? So while I did ask you to read about the Louisiana Project, this is something that that we can see going way, way back, right? And what I guess the Louisiana Project shows is that the advent of colonialism and the slave trade adds a political dimension that we're still living with and a social dimension that we're still living with. But the basic idea of planetary forces outside of comprehension that we need to engage with, nevertheless, because we live on that planet, right, is something that needs to be reckoned with as something that we've been dealing with for thousands of years, right? And I think that's really important to highlight as well. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So there is something. We'll see different. Like this passage that I read from Oedipus is rather negative towards the Earth, right? This awful sky, a monstrous issue, right? It's something that causes fear in the hearts, right? And that's not to say that like everything that we're going to be reading sees the planet in those senses, right? Already next week we're going to read some romantic poetry, so it's a completely different view of what the Earth is. Okay, but the reason why I brought this up is again just trying to get at this incredible and almost unthinkable scale of the planet, right? That I think this passage really demonstrates. Okay? Because it is unthinkable in many ways, right? Like our brain is incredible, right? As its own. No, I don't want to say as a machine. It's not a machine, right? Like it's incredible as a piece of body, right? To put it in the terms of Adam Curtis, the documentary, right? You're the universe kind of being aware of itself, right? That's how cool the brain is. But even then, trying to comprehend just the incredible magnitude of the planet is something that is difficult, and that, at least on some level, literature does try to get at. Right? So that's one of the things that we're going to be like thinking of. Okay? Anything that you wanted to add so far, or am I just going to like keep rambling for a bit? It's fine if you didn't have anything that you wanted to add, but I just wanted to know if you had anything that you wanted to. And then I have one other example before we tap out.
I think it's good.
Yeah. Okay. So
if there's anything else.
Yeah. Stop rambling for a sec. Yeah. The other example that I wanted to give, and that I think is a good bridge from ancient thought about the planet as a god in and of itself to our more contemporary concerns, right, with post-slavery or post-colonial planetary thought, right, is Shakespeare. I hope you've read Shakespeare before. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Some.
read Julius Caesar.
Julius Caesar is great. Yeah.
It's not my favorite.
Okay. I understand. Yeah, it's fine. It's not my favorite either, but it's good.
Long to just be like Julius Caesar dies.
And he dies halfway through.
Oh yeah. And then he's just like, oh no, it's a whole murder, betrayal.
Yeah. It's great.
I also saw, I saw it in the theater.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
But it was made by the Dawson decision. It was rough.
Yeah, it was Ashley who gave that class. Yeah. Wasn't it Ashley Marie who gave that class?
Yeah.
I remember.
I agreed it was not the best.
Yeah.
Best piece we've seen.
Yeah.
Totally. It was something.
How about you? Any Shakespeare
Not that
experience?
much. I feel like I lack in that department.
The only reason I bring up Shakespeare, of course, is because he's, classic. But he's also writing at a very specific time in world history, right? That does tie into everything that we're talking about today, right? What was happening, especially with Europe in the 16th, end of the 17th, beginning of the 17th century, especially for the English context that Shakespeare was writing in. So we're talking like the late 1500s, early 1600s here. What was England suddenly getting interested in?
I think maybe it's not colonization, but and the boat.
Oh yeah, it is.
New World, but they wanted the road to China.
Yeah, good. Okay.
So,
getting on that imperialism bandwagon.
I just had boats in mind.
Yeah, definitely. Boats was one of them. So, I bring up the English context. They're a bit later than everyone else as far as that's concerned, right? The Spanish and Portuguese were really like the ones who kickstarted that whole thing. But, Shakespeare was writing in a time when the world was simultaneously getting bigger, right? Because we were more and more aware of what we now call North America, for example, or Africa, and simultaneously getting smaller, right? Because it was getting easier and easier to actually get into those places, right? And to communicate with that place. And so this is where a lot of people who are interested in our themes for this course are starting to consider the shift towards what we call the globe, right? Being aware of this whole thing, this ball of blue and green that's floating in space, although they wouldn't have used that, but also starting to frame it as something where humans can basically act as their playground on it, right? And as you were saying, right, imperialism is really kicking into high gear at this point. As with it, resource extraction, right? Cutting down trees in order to make boats, right? On scales never before seen, right? In the most crude sense possible, right? The slave trade starts, and we are reducing certain categories of humans to resources, right? Tying us back to the whole Louisiana Project thing, right? Black Africans, right, no longer become human, right? They become a resource to be managed and shipped across the ocean. Right?
Yeah, they're literally stolen from their lands and brought. Just like, okay, there you are now.
And you can see this in the language of the time, by the way, like the way that these people were spoken about, right?
Yeah.
Is a way that is extremely reductive, right? Not using...
Dehumanizing.
Yeah, exactly. Dehumanizing.
They're not calling them human.
And also...
Whole other world.
Yeah, it's a whole other world, but you see what's really interesting, I think, for our purposes here is also the uses of terminology that is reminiscent of nature, right? And this can be a whole discussion with like deep time and so on, but you see this a lot with local indigenous populations here of comparing them to stone, right? Because they're prehistoric, quote unquote, right? But also you can extract their labor and resources as resources, right?
Yeah.
And so it becomes this whole question, right, of how, of what you do with this type of language, right, that dehumanizes on one hand, right, but also indicates, through horrible circumstances, of course, a changing shift in how we understand the world around us, right? I have one particular passage from The Tempest. Have any of you either read The Tempest? No? Shakespeare's Tempest? No.
Maybe passage, but, might have been a while ago.
Does anyone want to take a shot at reading this this very brief passage while I close the door? It's a small soliloquy in The Tempest, where the character of Miranda tells Caliban, one of the main characters, who's this like monstrous figure, coincidentally in the Caribbean, where the play takes place, right? He's a local of that place, where she berates him because he's the villain or one of the main antagonists of the story. Do either of you want to read it just to like change things up a little bit?
I didn't have to. The text.
No, it's fine. I didn't expect you to have this text right here.
Oh my god, I don't necessarily want to.
Okay.
Do you want to?
Can go. Okay. Well, I just hope I don't make any mistakes. It's so old language. Okay. A bored slave, which any print of goodness will not take, being capable of all ill, I pitied deed, took pains to make thee speak, thought thee each hour, one thing or other, when thou didst not, savage, know thine own meaning, but wilt gabble like a thing most brutish. I endowed thy purposes with words that made them known, but thy vile race, though thou didst learn, had that nature which good natures could not abide to be with. Therefore wast thou deservedly confined into this rock, who has deserved more than a prison. All right, then. That's what I read.
No, it's great.
Hope it was not too bad.
No, it's great. Did you catch all that?
Yeah.
Ish. Here.
Yeah, reading it helps.
Yeah, reading it. But right, if you wanted to look through it, but the basic idea is interesting, right? Especially at the end.
Yeah.
Thou confined to
A rock. Which is more than a prison for them.
Yeah.
It's more fitted than a prison because a rock is not even a place that humans would use to be entrapped. Yeah. But a prison is.
Earth and rock here as a prison.
Yeah.
For who exactly? Caliban.
I'm guessing he means the other people.
Well, so this is Miranda telling Caliban that he's not even deserved of that.
Yeah.
Right? And so, I'm not going to sit here on my soapbox and say we should cancel Shakespeare for this. This is not the point. All right. Yeah. The day we cancel Shakespeare is the day literature dies. But
things like that, but not all.
Yeah, right, but
representation.
Exactly, yeah. It's a representation of a particular person. Right. But not only is it a representation of one character, right, and presumably that character's thought of a native of. It's never explicitly said North America, but it's kind of assumed that that's what he was thinking of, right? This new land, right? This island that no one has ever touched before, which basically could have only been in the Caribbean at this point, but
yeah, and it was one of their first colonies.
Exactly.
I'm guessing that makes sense.
Yeah, so Shakespeare would have been firmly aware of like the rise, I guess, of empire, even though, of course, he wouldn't have known the scope that it would eventually lead into, right? But it is really interesting to see how that language is already developing, right, in the early days of empire. And part of that is because of how quickly just that logic spread, but also there's some argument to be made about how it was already ingrained, right, in medieval thought, right, that, for example, justified the Crusades, right? This kind of form of imperialism, but from a purely religious perspective, right? And that kind of like developed into early modern capitalism and then like expanded into empire as the British kind of knew it, right? But I just brought up this passage here again just to for the rock thing, right? Thou deservedly confined into this rock, right? Comparing this native to this rock-like figure. But also at the beginning of it, where Miranda says, "You are a thing most brutish. I endowed thy purposes with words that made them known." Right? I, civilized person, gave you language. Right? This quote-unquote savage did not even know how to speak. Right? He was nothing more than rock. And so you see the beginnings of like the civilizational mission, right, of empire in this kind of language. Okay. I would say also, by the way, keep that term brutish in mind. It will come back with Heart of Darkness. When we come back, when we talk about literary connections, I don't think it would be out of the realm of possibilities to say that Joseph Conrad was thinking of the speech and writing certain parts of Heart of Darkness. Yeah. Does anyone want to add anything to this? Does this make sense to everyone?
Yeah.
It was a bit of like a hodgepodge kind of coming over, but I think because next week we're starting with the Romantics, I did want to give a little bit of a preface up to that point, right? And I'll be giving a little bit more context of like where the Romantics specifically come in, right, with their literary project.
Okay.
Obviously, right? I don't expect you to like know everything about the Romantics, but there is a reason why I'm starting with the Romantics. First, because you kind of have to start somewhere arbitrarily, right? But also because I think more than any literary movement, we are still living with both the good and the bad of the Romantic era. Right? Both from a literary perspective and from just the perspective of this class, right? So that's kind of why I wanted to talk about them next week. I'll give context for that when we come to it. Okay. I guess I'm just going to look at my notes to make sure that I talked about everything I wanted to talk about. Caliban, the Greek gods, course description, good. I think that's it. I think that's everything I wanted to talk about. Are we satisfied with that?
Yeah.
Okay. So the homework for next week is already up.
Yeah.
Okay. So 3 poems. Okay. Mont Blanc is pretty long. It's like 5. It's like 5 stanzas, 5 parts. I think it's 2 stanzas each. So like 10 stanzas at most.
2 pages?
Max. And let's see. Hold on. I'm just pulling it up on Poetry Foundation just to see. Yeah. I'll say like 5 long stanzas. 2 pages max. And 2 William Blake poems that are much shorter. Okay. The introduction is it's Earth's Answer and the Introduction to Songs of Experience. Read the introduction first,
okay,
right? Because it's one after the other in the organization of the poems, right? That it's from. So it's introduction, and then it leads directly into Earth's Answer. Okay.
So if we read it in that order.
Yeah, actually, if you read it in that, I've forgotten which order that I had put it in studio, but if you read it in the actual order,
the order you just said.
That's fantastic, right?
So that's good.
The theory, right? The Anne McCarthy book article. Sorry. So the aesthetics of contingency and the Shelleyan universe of things. I always put up theory or articles that complement the readings for the week, because theory is something that that can be difficult for people, right? Not just for anyone. I would say focus on the actual literature for every week. Okay. The theory parts are always meant to be complementary to it, right? If you want extra stuff, it's not the end of the world if you don't have time to get to it. Often we'll kind of address it by weaving it into the conversation of the class.
I was going to ask.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is 22 pages.
Yeah, it's a long article, so that's why, like, again, it's as extra if you want like some perspective on it. Okay. Or if you want to, there's some theorists that I'm going to spend specific time on. Like week 3, I am going to spend some time on Spivak's Planetary, just because it was one of those like first texts to fully engage with that. Right? But that's few and far between. Okay. All right. Any questions, concerns, comments, insults?
Not that comes to mind.
None that come to mind. Yeah, you can send one later by email. Yeah. Okay, awesome. I think this was good.